Happy Friday, everyone. We do have some data to go over. We have CPI, and there is some good and there is some bad with it. But before that, we do have an article regarding Jamie Dimon's JPMorgan, who's set to allow top cryptocurrencies as collateral. JPMorgan will accept Bitcoin and Ethereum collateral in loans as the asset class becomes more integrated with traditional finance. And this is by the end of 2025. They will allow only institutional clients, of course, not the average me and you person. They'll allow institutional clients to pledge their crypto holdings to secure loans. This will be rolled out globally and use a third-party custodian. And this expands JP Morgan's decision with spot ETFs, allowing Bitcoin ETFs as collateral, particularly IBIT from BlackRock. And this tells us that institutional investors have been asking for this. They wouldn't just do this willy-nilly out of the blue. They know that there's a demand for it. This also means that companies can use their Bitcoin holdings as collateral to take loans against it, get approved for larger loans than they would otherwise. This article also talks about Jamie Dimon's evolution from calling Bitcoin basically a pet rock, saying it has no use, saying that if he was the government, he would ban it. Piece of shit. Although he has recently changed his rhetoric, saying basically like, I wouldn't want people to smoke, but I'll fight for your right to do so. I don't want you to buy Bitcoin, but I'll fight for your right to do so. Okay, sure. But I'll leave this down below for you guys if you're interested. There are some other tidbits to it. They mentioned that Morgan Stanley also aims to offer retail crypto trading through E-Trade in early 2026. And State Street, Bank of New York Mellon, Fidelity are all building custody businesses. Now here's the big data point for today, CPI. And we see a 3% read and a 0.3% increase on the month, which is lower than expected in both cases. The market expected a 3.1% year-over-year move, and it came in lower, however, still elevated. Excluding food and energy, core CPI showed a 0.2% monthly gain and a year-over-year rate of 3%, which is still less than forecasts. While it is down massively from where it was back in, late 2022, early 2023, it has been elevated from April's 2.3% read. It has been steadily rising since April, and that's not a good sign in terms of rate cuts. And this kind of gives you a good picture here. This is year-over-year on investing.com, year-over-year CPI. And, from our top in 2022, we are down drastically, but from that bottom, like I said, in April, May area, we have been taking up consistently. We are now back to where we were basically in February in terms of inflation, and the Fed needs this inflation lower, although it's still very likely we're getting a rate cut because of the poor labor market. Check this out. This is the Fed Watch tool, and this was previously like a 99% likelihood of a rate cut. Now we're at 97% just about. A slight decrease in likelihood, although heavily anticipated. So this CPI, luckily, it didn't come in much higher than expectations, although inflation has been rising versus previous reads. I do think the Fed's currently more focused on the labor market than it is inflation, but they've definitely got a tricky job trying to keep the labor market from getting more weak while also trying to tame inflation. Inflation's been rising, and they're kind of forced into cutting, which is definitely not preferable. We would prefer to see inflation actually coming down so they can fully focus on strengthening the job market, lowering those rates. But regardless, we are very, very likely for a rate cut. Long story short, CPI came in under expectations, but still elevated. Now, I do want to talk about Bitcoin, and then I'm going to talk about two of my favorite Bitcoin miners, Iren and Cleanspark, and something interesting that just happened to them on the RSI. And also Bitcoin, apparently. We got a little bounce right at the 50 on the RSI. We'll see if it comes down, breaks 50. Typically, when you see a correction or a small pullback, you want to see a bounce at 50. That gives an indication that this was just a dip, and the dip won't keep dipping. But also, I mentioned the other day, we bounced down to our 50 MA on the weekly. We have done this previously, but we do get a retest. Both previous times we did. We got a bounce here at the 50 MA on the weekly, and then we retested it. Dropped slightly under, but didn't get a candle to close under, and we rallied, hit new all-time highs, had a beautiful recovery. Same with back here. We came down to it, got a huge bounce, and then came back down and tested it before going on to break new all-time highs and having a beautiful rally. Basically double from this point. Here we are again. We are either gonna come down and retest the 50 MA at about 103,000, or this is where we recover. Simple as that. So keep an eye on the 50 MA on the weekly. If we do start coming down, it'll be very important that we hold over it, that we get a bounce there. If we break the 50 MA on the weekly, that'll be the first time we have done this in this entire cycle. So keep an eye on the 50 MA on the weekly. I think it's very important. Not only that, look at on the last cycle rally in 2021. We came down, bounced off the 50 MA. We didn't get a candle to close under it. We bounced off it again. Once we got candles under it, that was it. That was basically it. So keep an eye on the 50 MA. It's very important to watch. And like I said, we haven't broken under it one time this cycle in terms of a candle closing under. We have wicked under, but not more than that. So keep an eye on the 50 MA. If we do come down, if Bitcoin shows more weakness, very good likelihood we test it. We need to hold that up. In the future, it'll be important to watch. Once it breaks, once we break under, once we show more weakness, that'll probably mark the end of the bull run, probably mark the beginning of crypto winter. So the 50 MA is crucial to keep an eye on. And it basically painted it clear as day for you in the last cycle. You'll see that once we actually broke it, got candles closing under it, party over. Now I want to talk about Iren and Cleanspark, and it leads me to think that this was simply just a dip, a little pullback, not a complete change in trend, not going from this massive uptrend to suddenly a massive downtrend, and that is the 50 on the RSI. Iren literally came down and got a bounce at that 50, kind of like it did previously. It slightly dipped under it, but it got a bounce first, right around July, and we have been seeing a fantastic rally from Iren. Keep an eye on this trend. First, see how we do if we come back down to the 50 on the RSI, but what's important also to me is this trend that Iren's been in. If we do see it come down by say early November and test like 50, that'll be important to hold 50. We got a recent test of 50. We broke slightly under it. Literally tested this previous resistance here. Look at that. I'll try to zoom in a little bit here. But we basically came down, tested our previous resistance, the only, one in recent history. We found some resistance here and finally broke it, and you saw a continued run once we broke it. But we did come down and literally bounce out the level. This psychological 50 is an important level if Iren does start pulling back. And it'll also be important to hold up if we're at this trend line by then. If it's like early to mid-November and we're testing 50, we need to hold this trend line. This uptrend is important to watch in my opinion. And one thing we saw recently, we did see some equal highs and higher highs, and Iren has cooled down after that. Also something we have coming right around the corner is earnings. And Iren is expecting a pretty nice growth in revenue. They're also anticipating a profitable quarter. If any Bitcoin miner posts a profit, it's going to be either Iren or Cleanspark or both. They are the most efficient Bitcoin miners. And regarding Iren, it's still all about the Bitcoin mining, despite people thinking it's just an AI play. That is such a small portion of the business still. They are still building it out. By 2026, it'll be a larger part of the business. But you can go back to their last mining update. They make like $2 million a month from AI. They make like 50 to 70 million a month from Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is the largest part of their business. I could say that till I'm blue in the face and people will still not understand that. So the Bitcoin side of thing is crucial. Remember that this is the period ending in September. This is the highest that Bitcoin has been trading at in any quarter in its history. If any of the Bitcoin miners are going to post a profit, it's going to be Iren and Cleanspark, and or probably both in my opinion if you had to ask me. I think both are going to post a profit. But throughout this quarter, Bitcoin's been trading at anywhere from like $105 to $120,000 or so. While we don't have necessarily FastB accounting on our side, Bitcoin didn't necessarily see a massive gain throughout the quarter. It's more flat than anything. We're talking July, August, September. We started July at like 107 and ended September at like 112. So maybe a slight gain. If I was reading that right, I'm probably off by a few thousand. But maybe a slight gain in terms of their FastB accounting, being able to account for Bitcoin seeing an unrealized gain, which will help them. But ignoring that, Bitcoin's average price is the highest it's ever been in any month reported. They should be mining at a profit. Now, same deal with Cleanspark. We got to bounce right at that 50. That's very interesting. If you guys are watching any other Bitcoin miners, let me know what other Bitcoin miners are bouncing at the 50. I would assume these aren't the only ones. One thing with Cleanspark is it did break its trend. You see this uptrend that it bounced off multiple times. Once we broke under it, you saw a continued drop. A pretty substantial drop. And this drop didn't just drop where it did for no reason. It came down to a previous resistance point. Market didn't necessarily want to bring it to $15 apparently. They wanted to bring it to a previous resistance and see if it holds as a support, this roughly $16 area. If we come down and retest and break this, we're likely to test the psychological 15, a previous resistance as well. Also near the 50 MA, which is at 14. But if we get a pullback, these are going to be still climbing because they're lagging indicators. They're still accounting for this run up. So the 50 MA by then could be sitting right at $15 or so. And that is if we continue pulling back, if we break 16, which is an important level to hold now. But, you know, same thing here with Iren and Cleanspark. We got to bounce at the 50 RSI. I do think the party is not over, and I do think this was simply just a dip, but it really depends on Bitcoin. Bitcoin needs to finish its cycle off, see new all-time highs, let the cycle play out as it always has. We got all these people hoping that the cycle is broken just so we continue running in 2026. But that causes us to basically be blind in terms of Bitcoin. I'd rather know that the cycle is playing out. I'd rather see things top out at the end of this year and see a pullback in 2026 and see history repeat. Makes life a lot easier to be able to follow the pattern rather than if Bitcoin was to break the cycle and run throughout 2026. I would personally rather see a crypto winter in 2026 than to see things continue to go up and be unsure of when the next pullback is. It's all choreographed. It's very easy to follow unless the cycle breaks. So hoping that the cycle is broken, I think is not the way to look at this. I hope the cycle continues on. I hope we top out by the end of this year, November, maybe December, and we see a nice little correction. It won't be as severe as past crypto winters, but you know, a nice 20, 30, maybe 40% correction from Bitcoin. Bring it to me. Come on. This is what we should all be hoping for. Lower prices for Bitcoin to reaccumulate during the bad times so we get more gains in the future. The lower something goes that you can buy at, the higher multiples, the higher potential you can have for it. I'd much rather see Cleanspark in crypto winter pull back down to $2 to $5 to be able to reaccumulate rather than just see it go down to like $15 in the future and be forced to reaccumulate only in this average range. You'll get much more multiples buying from $2 to $5 and seeing a run to $20, $30 than seeing a pullback to $15 and seeing a run to like $40, $50. Anyways, moving on. Cleanspark's reporting their earnings. This is going to be actually pretty late in December. They're anticipating a profit as well. They are also anticipating pretty decent growth in revenue. One thing I wanted to show you for Bitcoin before I go is it does look like we are, forming kind of a W. Boom. Getting a bit of a double bottom here. But how are you guys feeling about CPI today? Do you think it's as likely as the market sees it that we're getting a rate cut, like a 90-something% chance? Or do you think it's more like a coin flip? Because inflation is elevated, it is definitely far from the Fed's target. So I guess the market could be wrong. I do think, and I think it's proper to anticipate a rate cut in the end of the month here. But future rate cuts are definitely uncertain if we can continue to see inflation rising and if the job market actually regains some strength. That'll make it very unlikely for the Fed to cut rates. But if we continue to see weakness from the job market, and if we see inflation at least not rising dramatically, we will probably still be getting rates. Keep an eye on Bitcoin on the 50 MA. I think this is a crucial level to hold, very important to hold. How do you feel about the Bitcoin miners? Do you think it's the end of the party? Do you think they've already topped out? Or do you think we're going to see them hit some new highs this cycle before the cycle's over, before the party comes to an end? Thanks as always for watching, guys. Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next time.